Good afternoon. Welcome. Before I dive into my presentation here, I wanted to take a quick poll around the audience on a few questions. So you can just raise your hand if yes. The first question is, who here works in an industry that they consider to be pretty heavily regulated? Okay. Who here works at an organization where they use cloud apps or cloud systems like Concur or Workday? Okay. How about people whose organization runs maybe 10 or more different applications? Okay. And the last question, last time I'll make you raise your hand, say, who here within their organization thinks they know what all of their data is and where all of it sits? All right, we got an all-star here. Okay, so the astute attendees among you might see a theme within those questions I'm asking, right? All of those things are potential risks to an organization, and likely why a lot of you are here today in this session. So this is Analyze, Visualize, Comply, Analytics for Managing Risk. My name is Gordon Rowland. I'm currently with KPMG, based out of Los Angeles, although my Tableau journey has taken me to a number of different companies and a number of different locations across the US. So I wanted to start out with a really uplifting and deep quote. I was looking for something from maybe the Dalai Lama or a past president. Unfortunately, being the analytics person that I am, I found one that was a little less inspiring, but I think a lot more on point for what we're going to be discussing today. So getting started with compliance analytics requires a vision, a roadmap, and achievable milestones that deliver results. If that quote right there resonates with you like it does with me, then you're in the perfect place, because those are the things we're going to discuss today. How you can have that vision, share it with your organization, how you can define that roadmap and execute against it, and what are the milestones you can set up along the way that will help you achieve the results you're looking for. I'll go pretty quickly here through our agenda. So we're going to start out with the session objectives, really what I'm trying to convey to you and what hopefully you all can take home at the end of this. We'll talk about finding opportunities for risk analytics. I think a lot of you are probably attracted to this session because in the abstract, I mentioned it seems so easy to find great opportunities for analytics and sales functions, customer experience. Tableau's really got those spaces covered. But really, finding those opportunities in risk analytics, they're there. It's just how do we define those, and then how do we move on them, which brings me to the next objective, which is taking those opportunities and actually turning them into actions. Right? Now we've defined, okay, there is a use for risk analytics in our organization. How do we execute against those? I'll talk about delivering value, using some examples from things that I've executed with clients at KPMG or actually deployed at companies I've worked with in the past. We'll talk about defining your roadmap, talk about some pain points that I've seen at a number of organizations in the past, how you can avoid those, how you can still have success in deploying your analytics program. I will save some time at the end for a Q&A, so if you have any questions, please hang on to them till the end. I do also realize this is the last session between you guys and Data Night Out, so we're going to move quickly through this, hopefully have some fun, and then get you all off to the party. So our session objectives. Right? We're going to dive into opportunities for analytics in risk functions. We're going to define what those opportunities are, whether it's at a macro level or maybe something more specific to your organization. We're going to discuss how technology is really driving the need for analytics to help cover risk organizations. We're going to talk about some example dashboards that I've used in the past. We'll explore cost efficiencies that come through an effective and efficient implementation of a risk analytics program. I think this is huge, right? Because where a sales function, for example, can make a pretty easy business case for using Tableau, they can better segment, they can identify opportunities for them to get more sales in the future. Sometimes in these risk organizations, that's not easy to quantify. So we'll look at how you can do that, some key areas that I've seen in the past. And then finally, we'll leave you with a roadmap for deployment, talk about the common pain points and how you can achieve, whether you're just getting started on your Tableau journey for risk analytics, or maybe you already have some dashboards or some idea of how you want to go about it. I think there's going to be something for everyone in this session. I'm going to use an analogy as we go through this too. It's a little corny, but it's something that I think has resonated well with companies that I've worked with in the past, that building out your risk analytics suite is a lot like building a house, right? You can't just start out and say, I want to go build these 50 great dashboards. I learned so much at TC19. I've got all these great ideas. That might be part of the house, but you really need to build it from the ground up. You need to lay that foundation, set up the framing, put on the walls, and then put the roof on top to really have a solution that's going to be sustainable and successful for you over the long term. So finding opportunities for risk analytics. I think I've put a number up here that we'll talk through. I think these will apply to some of you in the room. Maybe you'll have other ideas of where the risks come from, but the key thing to think about here is this is that foundation of that risk analytics house. Right? We need to have a solid foundation, or else we'll sputter as we start to move forward, and we'll end up creating dashboards that either don't deliver the value we were hoping for, or eventually fall flat because they're not sustainable. So I think one I see, I've worked primarily with audit functions in the past, is over the last decade, everyone's being asked to do more with less. Right? It's very easy for an executive to look at their overall P&L, say, I need to cut costs, and they want to cut their star salesman, but hey, audit's not making us any money. Let's, maybe not fill some of the positions that we have there. And I see that trend. It's, I think, been increasing over the last few years. And I think that goes hand in hand with the second point here as well, right? Not only are headcounts going down, but there's been quite a bit of change in technology over the last 10, 15, 20 years, and the rate of that change is really accelerating. There's expected to be $3.9 trillion spent on IT in 2019 alone. I work quite a bit with companies that run SAP. 10 years ago, a company would purchase SAP, they'd run it, it would be their single application, they do all of their procurement, their sales, their finance, accounting out of this single system. And that's really rare to see today. Companies will get Ariba to do their procurement. They'll invest in Workday for their HR, maybe Salesforce for their CRM. And the more applications that companies are running, the more data they're generating, and the more potential technology risk that they have. I saw a recent Gartner poll that showed that from 2010 to 2020, the amount of data large organizations have is going to go up 50 times over, 50. So there's going to be more and more data out there held in different applications, and being able to manage the risk. Really, it's difficult to do unless you're using a tool like Tableau, particularly if you're losing headcount at the same time. The final point is increasing business complexity. So not just on the IT side, but businesses and how they function as a whole. Before I was at KPMG, I was at a large media company based in Los Angeles, and they, every year, were trying to expand to new countries. And as a result of that expansion, they'd have these small offices that maybe, had a couple people in them, and they're being tasked with trying to pick up this huge business that has millions of products from back catalogs that sells in all sorts of distribution channels. And that brought all sorts of new risks to the organization that you can't necessarily place the blame on the people in these new countries, right? You need to have some centralized way to get comfort over your operations, even as they're expanding. And that's just on the operations side, right? Even on back office tasks. I think, the outsourcing boom started over a decade ago, and that for many companies started with, moving things like customer service and call centers offshore. But now a lot of transactions are getting processed offshore. Whether it's people generating invoices, creating purchase orders, accounting documents. More and more of that's going offshore and will continue to as companies try and cut costs by having a cheaper labor force here onshore. Increasing regulation. So for those of you who work with companies that have operations in Europe, right, GDPR has really affected how many companies operate there. In California, CCPA is going live on January 1st. I know Nevada here has some privacy laws and legislation, and I think the rate of that change is only going to increase. And it's not just around data privacy, right? Regulators, I think, are becoming more invasive in some businesses. They're asking for more information. They're trying to get more details. And it's incredibly difficult to do that if you don't have the right tools and technology in place to do so. And the final opportunity I want to touch on is the impact of failures. I think we've all seen over the last handful of years the rate at which these failures are increasing, and more companies are ending up in the paper. Capital One recently with their breach, Sony Pictures back in the day, and it's only continuing to go up. And there's increased action by federal regulators as a result of that. They're coming out, the SEC, I think, is breaking a new record this year in terms of their enforcement actions, and that rate's probably going to continue to go up. So now we talked about a number of different opportunity drivers, which I mentioned is really the foundation of this house, right? So if you're talking to management at your company, you want to be able to give them a complete case for why they should start a risk analytics function or why they should continue to build out that function that they've already started. So you can use these things, or if there's other opportunity drivers that apply to what you're trying to do, to kind of lay the groundwork. And then on top of that, you can layer in the business costs, right? So if you have less people, you're being asked to do more, well, you can use Tableau, you can use an analytics program to cut the time spent on repetitive manual processes. At the entertainment company that I was at, they had a whole compliance department, 6 people, who every day would just pour through spreadsheets trying to get comfort over the payments that the company was making to their talent, to the actors, to the writers, the directors, et cetera, because they're getting paid every time those TV shows air. Even if it's at 2 a.m. on a channel no one's ever heard of, those people are entitled to some share of the money that's coming in. So they had millions upon millions monthly transactions in terms of paying out these people what they needed. We came in and looked at that process, and it's something that, even the brightest person in that group pouring through these spreadsheets, they're looking for a needle in a haystack. And even on top of that, they can't necessarily be looking at every single payment, right? They can only look at some of the high value ones and hope to get comfort over it. So we deployed an analytics solution out there using Tableau that was able to take all of the payments across the business, the millions that were happening every month, put them in the dashboards, and we immediately identified $5 million in payments that they had not made to the talent, that if that didn't go detected, the guilds could have come back and fined them almost as much as those missed payments themselves. And that also ties into the next point as well, increasing the coverage. So the example I just gave was around outgoing payments. I think it's something that's really, it started kind of slowly, but it's really kind of transforming the way that audit works as well, right? 10, 15, 20 plus years ago, when audit came in, they wanted to audit a process, say, manual journal entries. They'd get this huge population and they'd say, well, we're going to look at 15 of those, maybe 20 of them, and see what we can find within there. Well, now, by using a tool like Tableau, you can actually look across the full population, and where sometimes there might have been issues in those accounting documents you didn't look at because of your sampling approach, now all of a sudden you can get comfort over a whole population. It also drives value to the organization in other ways. So things like identifying fraud and error. I'm going to show an example a little bit later around a dashboard we did around segregation of duties in the procurement process. But it can be difficult, especially if you have a global organization, you have outsourced functions like in the procurement process, to get comfort over segregation of duties, and it could lead to fraud. So we found a number of employees who have been acting maliciously in terms of taking advantage of the access they had to actually process payments to themselves that went undetected by the company for a number of years. One of the biggest things that I think can be a driver for us in the risk, the compliance, the internal audit space is oftentimes I've seen when I've worked with organizations and they've created analytics, it provides a lot of value to that risk group, but then when they go to the business and they start sharing, hey, this is what we were able to find by using Tableau, all of a sudden the business, their eyes perk up, because oftentimes they don't have the means to have a view into data and to come to the conclusions that you can by leveraging Tableau. And the final point is around expanding the scope of monitoring. So I mentioned doing full population testing. I know in audit, we always talk about taking a risk-based approach, focusing on the big ticket items. Sometimes that means ignoring certain processes, certain locations. But if you're using a tool as powerful as Tableau that can pull that all together, all of a sudden you can make conclusions over some of those things that you had left out in the past. Okay, so we've talked about the opportunity, we've talked about that kind of ground floor, we've talked about the value that it can provide to the business and to your specific function. Now let's talk about taking that from opportunity to action. I think the number one point here I want to talk about is finding the right people. And since all of you are here, you've made it to Tableau conference, I think you're going down that path in terms of making yourselves be part of that right group of people. But once you kind of define what your program's going to be for analytics, it's more than just having someone who knows Tableau well. It's more than just having a strong developer. It's really, you need to think about organizational change management, right? I've met some people at the conference this year who, they came out, they talked to their boss so that they could take this trip to Las Vegas. They've learned all these cool things about Tableau. They want to go back, they want to create these 40 cool dashboards they learned how to create here at this conference. And that's good, and that enthusiasm is what you want, but it can't just be a one person driving, trying to make this happen for their organization. You need involvement from the appropriate management, and you also need to understand that, Tableau is user-friendly enough that it's pretty easy to put together some quick dashboards that maybe, simplify something you were doing in the past or put a prettier face on something you had done in Excel before. But that's not necessarily the solution to a sustainable risk analytics function. I think the key part here as well is defining level of integration with IT. So if you're in a audit function, risk function, compliance function, oftentimes your resources are stressed thin already, and if you're trying to commit a lot of resources now to building out these Tableau dashboards, you might not get the buy-in from your management, from the people overseeing your function, whereas if you can try and rely on integrating with IT. Maybe other parts of your organization are already using Tableau. Maybe you have people in the IT department who can help you with getting the data set up, getting reports that you can use and leverage them within Tableau. Then you can have a more efficient deployment because you personally, or whoever within your organization is kind of leading this, is spending less time doing kind of the nuts and bolts IT work, and instead can focus on building dashboards that have an impact. And you want to assess the competencies of your current team. Having been in a lot of internal audit departments and helped them stand up analytics functions, in some cases we've got 25-year-olds there who have no interest in learning Tableau. And there's 55-year-olds who think it's the coolest thing that they've ever seen. They want to come to the Tableau conference. Finding out if you have the right people and who can help drive that is important. And it might be people that you already have within your team. It might be bringing in some outside help to supplement your team, but getting the right team so that you can actually build out what you're trying to in Tableau, execute on your vision, and deploy it is essential to having success. You also want to define goalposts. It's really easy, again, like the people out here that I've talked to who want to go create 50 dashboards that take over something they were doing in Excel before and say, those are the goalposts I want to hit. I just want to put things in Tableau. That's not really the solution in terms of having an effective program and having something that will actually drive value to the organization. When I talk to companies about what they want to do in Tableau, a lot of times their answer is pretty basic. They say, hey, we always try and look at sales over this period. Let's put that in Tableau. Let's look at the amount we're spending on X, Y, and Z, and maybe break it out in a couple of different ways. I think the best way to define the goalpost is not to say, I want dashboard X, Y, and Z. It's to put it in the format of a question, right? What is the question that we're trying to answer? In the case of sales, maybe it's what's driving the sales over the past year, right? And then you give that to a developer, and they might have some different ideas on how you can do that, but at least you're not pigeonholing it. You can work with what the data gives you. When I first started out doing Tableau development, this drove me crazy sometimes because I would talk to people at clients I was at, or when I was in industry talking to my managers, and they'd say, yeah, make a dashboard that shows sales over time. So I'd whip that up pretty quick, maybe put some cool graphics in there, Sankey diagrams, whatever I could to make it look really great. And then I'd give it to them, and they'd say, now that I look at that, let's actually do something different. Let's look at it, in this other way. It would drive me crazy, but then once we found out that the best way to do it was not to just say, let's build dashboard X. Let's find some questions that we can't answer right now, that we can't answer with the tools that we have, or that would be difficult to answer, and let's use Tableau on that. And then that gives you some free rein to think about, okay, what are those dashboards going to look like? How can we bring these things together, and how can we use all the great inherent functionality in Tableau to actually achieve those things? Okay, assessing the environment. So in addition to trying to leverage people that you have in IT already, it's important to leverage your existing technology investments. I'm a big fan of Eltrix. I think it's a great tool, but oftentimes right out of the bat saying, let's buy a tool to work with Tableau, to work with something else, isn't necessarily the right solution to having an effective deployment. If you can leverage, maybe your company has business warehouses, you have data lakes, you have reporting that's already been built out. The more you can leverage that, the less cost that your risk analytics program will have, and then maybe down the line you can look at adding other technologies onto it. In terms of finding the right opportunity to, whether it's to begin this journey or to really capitalize on your Tableau investment, it's important to look in areas that you can't succeed right now. So specifically focusing on areas that have high volumes of transactions. I was at a client where they used to look at this process within procurement, and they had 8 different Excel workbooks, which were just different splits of the data because they couldn't fit it all in Excel. Obviously, that's a pretty obvious case of an area where using Tableau can accelerate their journey and can give them some visibility that they didn't have before. You can look for areas with past issues, whether it's audit issues, compliance issues. It's easy to make a business case if you say, hey, we've had this issue for the last 3 years running. We're going to use Tableau now so that we can get better visibility into it and hopefully find a better solution. And finally, taking a risk-based approach. If you want to go and build Tableau dashboards around some minor process in your company, it's not going to have the same impact as if you can come in and say, we have $4 billion in procurement a year, and now we can look at all of that in a centralized fashion, and we can focus on the exceptions that we really care about. And then finally, putting kind of the roof on top of this house is deploying. I think the part that I can't harp on enough is really data, data, and data. Just like any form of reporting, if you don't have the right underlying data, what you put into great Tableau dashboards is not going to have an impact. It might even lead people astray in terms of thinking that some of the conclusions you're coming to are accurate when it's actually driven by bad data. And finally, it's important to be iterative in the approach that you take. I think a Tableau deployment is best served by using an agile or a hybrid agile deployment strategy, because even if we're setting it up, we followed the steps I've talked in this presentation already. Our analytic objectives are these open questions. As soon as people start seeing what you're doing in Tableau, a lot of times you have those aha moments. I know working in media, we created some dashboards around sales in foreign countries, and once we started to get in there, I started to share it with the people who were kind of in charge of that process. They immediately, their eyes opened up and they said, oh, this is great, but now that we can see what's happening through these dashboards, let's also build out dashboards around these different ways that we can cut up the data so that we can really get a fully encompassing approach. You don't just want to, whether you're the developer or you're giving it to someone else, say, here are your objectives, we'll see you again in 3 months and you can present it to us. Those are the dashboards that most often fall flat when it comes to actual deployment. So delivering value. I want to walk through quickly here. I've got 3 dashboards that are kind of in different areas. They are very transaction monitoring based. So I would say that even if maybe these don't apply directly to what you're trying to do around risk analytics, look for how you can maybe take some of the things we learned here and apply them elsewhere. So the first dashboard that I wanted to share is around segregation of duties monitoring. So audit departments care a lot about SODs and people who have access to those. So kind of the historical way that segregation of duties have been managed is either you have someone manually going into the system and checking the access that people have, making sure they don't have the ability to, for example, create a vendor in the system and process a purchase order against them or process an invoice against them. You could do that manually, or you could make significant investments to get a tool like SAP's GRC, SOD monitoring tool, Oracle's tool. There's a number of other third-party tools out there. So when looking at that process, right, those tools came out 10, 15 plus years ago. And the problem with kind of the static monitoring tools in place is that it can tell you what people potentially could do, but it wouldn't tell you if someone had conflicting abilities, what they actually did. So in the case that it kind of slipped through the cracks and people were getting this unintended access, then it was a huge burden for the business to go back and look and say, okay, did Joe over in Canada, who had access to both of these abilities, did he actually do anything wrong? So by using analytics, by using a transaction monitoring-based approach, we can move away from that static, backwards-looking monitoring mechanism. And what we did here is we said, it's okay if some people have access to both of these abilities. It'll happen. Maybe Joe up in Canada had to have both abilities because Joe's the only one who does procurement up in Canada. Instead, let's focus on what he actually did. Did he create vendors and inappropriately process purchase orders against them? And now, not only do we not need to make a significant investment in an SOD monitoring tool, but now in the case that we do find something wrong, we can find it wrong almost immediately and we can act upon it. The second dashboard is around spend analysis. So I mentioned I used to be in entertainment, and 20 years ago, the entertainment world was kind of the wild, wild west. Executives at all of the big studios would be given P cards, and If they wanted to, keep the talent happy, they could come out here to Las Vegas and rent out the whole top floor of the Mandalay Bay, and no one would really bat an eye. Over the last 15 years, with the changes in the media and entertainment industry, most notably, Netflix and Disney Plus came out this week, all of a sudden executives started saying, we can't just have everyone spending all the company's money away. So we did an analysis taking data both from their SAP system and also their separate P-card system, and we're able to bring that together, and really focus on what are the things that are keeping the executives up at night? What are they worried about? Well, in this case, a lot of times it's the people who are spending the most, right? Is that someone you'd expect who is at the head of the studio, or is that, someone's assistant who happened to get a P card? What are the expenses going towards, both in terms of vendors and also in terms of cost centers? And although this wasn't, created so that they could necessarily go and find people who are doing things inappropriately, it allowed them to identify, okay, how can we start pushing our employees towards operating in this new world we need to be in, where they're not going willy-nilly with their P cards. And this third dashboard I wanted to share, I really like this one because I think it's a great example of what I mentioned before, where something that we created for an internal audit group actually brought significant value to the business. So what we're looking at here is, again, for a media company, they have, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of different titles. They've got a backlog of TV shows and movies since things that were created back in, the golden age of television. And they still sell that. And they sell it not only in the US, but they sell it internationally. They also have the concern that even though these titles are being sold in different countries, they don't necessarily want to sell them at different prices there, right? They don't want someone to be able to hop on a flight and they go down to Brazil, for example, and they can buy 100 seasons of the latest Game of Thrones for half of what they'd pay for here, because then people would go buy all those Games of Thrones, come back up, sell them on Amazon, and make a pretty penny. So what we did in this analysis is we looked at, by title, each of the prices that they were being sold at through each distribution channel, and did some kind of basic data analysis around that. So what this is really showing, and the kind of colorful portion here, is that the higher on the y-axis, one of those dots, with each dot representing an individual title, the more extreme the outliers for the price were. So if, for example, it was always sold at $20, but then it was sold at 50 cents, then it would be higher on the y-axis, whereas if it was all at $20 or close to it, it would be very close to the x-axis. Where along the x-axis is the variability in the price, so not just single outliers, but actual variable prices that were frequently used. So when we created this for the purposes of an audit, and then we went and met with the people in the sales department, we entered the room and we were kind of telling them about what we did. They were a little glazed over, thinking, okay, here comes audit again. They're going to share with us, 20 samples in an Excel workbook, and we'll tell them, oh yeah, we sold it at whatever price because of X, Y, and Z. And the second we put this up on the screen and really explained to them what it was doing, they were all, sitting straight up in their chairs, eyes wide open, because they didn't have the ability to do anything like this. So that's, again, one way, really, in terms of focusing on where you can deliver value, is think about not just what can help you and your organization, but if you can bring value out to other groups within your business, is when, not only will you be seen as a data rock star in your risk or compliance or audit group, but actually across the organization. All right, defining the roadmap. So across all the clients I've been at, we found lots of different pain points, right? It's going through a Tableau implementation and really rolling out a successful deployment. Oftentimes, it hits bumps in the road. One of the main places we see that is a lack of resources. So whether it's you've only got one person, working on this Tableau initiative and no one else is there to support them, whether it's, hey, we've got Tableau, but we're not sure the supporting technologies are there. It's important to, before you go in and before you start this program, again, set the foundation for this risk analytics house you're going to build. Define what those areas are going to be, and make sure you have the right people, you have the right technology, and you have the right reporting in place. The second thing is organizational buy-in. I really saw this quite a bit earlier in my career before I started to use kind of this common roadmap is, a lot of people, especially who have been to Tableau conference, who have seen great dashboards and all of the power within Tableau, we're all excited about this and we all have this vision in our heads for what it can be. But sometimes when you take that home and you go to your directors or your VPs or your senior VPs and you say, I want to, really spend some time on Tableau. I think we should invest heavily in this. It falls flat. So how do you get that organizational buy-in? Well, I think that if you're early on in your Tableau risk analytics journey, the key is to find really a pilot project. I mentioned before, look for those high-risk areas. Look for those areas you've had errors in the past where you have a high volume of transactions going through the system or a high amount of complexity within the process. And in my first work with Tableau, I actually ended up kind of having to bootstrap our Tableau implementation on my own because it was difficult to get that buy-in. But I took and I found a process that was high value that in the past we had kind of struggled to cover using tools like Excel or Access. And by spending a bit of my own time using this pilot approach, it actually got us the buy-in to expand that program and really have a lot of success with Tableau. And finally, methodology change. I mentioned before, especially for audit departments, it's a huge change to go from taking a sampling approach to looking at full populations. Before you go out and you make these large changes, it's important to have the organizational change management in place so that when you all of a sudden are finding all of those things that used to be needles in a haystack and now they're brought out by using the power of Tableau, how are you going to approach that? What does it mean to the organization, and how can you action on it without all of a sudden everyone's turning on you and saying, well, you never found these in years past, everything was fine when you're using your old sampling approach, and now you're going to come beat me up over this only because you changed your approach. And an example there that we found success in was using this approach. If you are going to go, for example, from sampling approach to full population, is the first time you do that, you say, we're still going to do our testing the same way we did it before. We're still going to use a sampling approach, but using this tool, here's what's coming. Here's what's coming down the line. We're going to be doing this full population testing, and share those results. Share those results with the affected owners of those processes. Maybe they'll want to adopt a similar mechanism so that they can have comfort over their processes, but you can use that to really accelerate making that change. All right, so we've gone through all these different steps. We've gone through the pain points. We've talked about building this risk analytics house. So what does your roadmap need to look like? Number one, identify the opportunity. Define that foundational layer that you're going to build upon. Number two, build your business case, right? Set up those walls on that building. Make sure that you're going to be able to get buy-in because you're going to be able to deliver value to the business. Assess your current people, processes, and technology. You don't want to go down this path and then all of a sudden have it fall flat because you didn't have the right people involved, because you didn't look for opportunities to leverage current IT or processes in place. Set the expectations. So whether it's around a methodology change, whether it's defining those goalposts in terms of what are we really trying to answer? What is the timeline that we're trying to deliver this dashboard or these dashboards on? And then finally, deploy. You've built your risk analytics house. You've got the roof on there. It's important that when you deploy, you've got a plan in place to share it with the appropriate people and to also make it sustainable. Just because you rolled out a dashboard doesn't mean that it's going to keep doing what it's supposed to do for months or even years to come. Have a plan in place when you deploy such that it will be sustainable over time. And so now we've talked about how you can build that risk analytics house. Hopefully it gives you an opportunity to build that out over time into your risk analytics mansion. And with that, I'm going to open up for questions. Thank you all for being here with me today. Please complete the session survey in the mobile app. I really appreciate your feedback and being here. And yeah, if anyone has questions, feel free. Yeah, go ahead.